on YouTube. I'll explain that in a moment. So hi there, and welcome to the July monthly Hypnotherapy Uncensored Spotlight, guest hosted today by the brilliant Paulina Trevena. And we met, I think you reached out to me about quantum journeys hypnosis, wondering if I was including anything about aphantasia. And so we've talked a little bit about it, but we haven't really gone farther than that. And I'm excited to sort of partner up with you at some point in the future when both of our schedules allow. I'm Krissa Marie Bowman, your hostess with the mostest. Let's see, Dr. Paulina Trevena is a hypnotherapist, a trainer, and a researcher. And I think that we don't know about the researcher side so much. Also neurodivergent, aphantasia, ADHD, hello. Like, I feel like sisters from another mister. Specializing in supporting people with the same conditions. And during your hypnosis training, you realized that having aphantasia was a barrier to experiencing hypnosis, much like me. We have different varieties, which is something I didn't even know existed until we talked. And so you started a research project into aphantasia and hypnosis. Your mission is to raise awareness of aphantasia in the hypnotherapy community, promote best practices in working with clients who have limited or no mental imagery. And so today you're going to talk to us about how to recognize aphantasia, what it is exactly, how it affects the individual, and how best to adapt our techniques for them. And just so everybody knows, the replays of this will go up on our YouTube channel. I will send you the link here in the little sidebar in a moment. And when you go in there, please like and subscribe. I always forget to ask that part. Okay, there's a whole bunch of, they go back 4 years. There's a whole bunch of great stuff. And so with that, Paulina, take it away, my dear.
Okay, fine. Chris, I forgot to ask you one question. Is it possible to share my screen at some point?
Yeah, let me give you control over that.
Okay, because if it is, I'm not going to throw slides at you. Or not too many slides at you, but I would like to do just a little exercise in the beginning. Being recorded, okay. A little exercise in the beginning to kind of get a better feel for what aphantasia is exactly. Because, well, first of all, can I ask, like, who's even heard of it? Okay, you've heard of it. Okay, and what have you heard about it, actually? What do you know what it is? Or what have you heard? You can use the chat, or you could just unmute and tell me. Or have you just heard that it's just the term and that's it?
I think it's not fair for me to answer this question because you and I have talked a lot about it. I'll leave it for other people, but I hadn't heard of it until I started in my first hypnotherapy academy and realized that I had it.
Okay. Just the term. Okay, fine. In that case, let's start from a little exercise. So what I'd like to ask you to do is just close your eyes for me for a moment. And just imagine an apple. And close your eyes and just imagine an apple. Just really hone in on that apple, picture that apple, think of that apple. Let's say a green apple. Okay, and just picture it as clearly as you can. And open your eyes for me for a moment. And I think that's, whoops, can you see? I can't see what you can see. Can you see a picture with apples? You can. Okay, sorry, I'm on two screens and I'm confused about what you can see and what you can't see. Okay, so looking at that picture, this is kind of a very, very simplified representation of the imagination spectrum, right? So some people, when they think of that apple, they see it as clearly as in real life. So that's like a number 5. Other people are like me, basically. They think of the apple, they can't see a thing. It's completely blank there. So I would just like to ask you, like just looking at this very, very simple graph, where are you? Where would you say you are on that graph? Are you like a 5 and you can see everything as clearly as in real life? Are you a 1, you can't see anything? Or are you somewhere in between? Most people are usually in between. So you might kind of see the apple, but maybe not as clearly. It might be, you might have a color there, it might be black and white. So yeah, so we're all somewhere else on the imagination spectrum. So I can see 1, 4, 5, 1, 5. Then Chris is kind of on the other end of the spectrum, same as me, and another 5. That never fails to amaze me, to be honest, because so aphantasia, so people who can't see that apple at all, or can see it very, 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 very vaguely, almost not at all. It's about 4% of the population who has it, and then around 8% are the other on the other side of the imagination spectrum, at the other extreme side. So they're a number 5, which means they have hyperphantasia, which is, you know, a unique ability to see things as clearly as in real life. And it never fails to amaze me because I kind of, you know, scope people always for this in the beginning, just to scope the room, just see where people are at. And it never fails to amaze me how many hyperphantasics there are among hypnotherapists. So I think there's something there that attracts people who can visualize really well to hypnotherapy, I think, because it honestly is not typical that there are so many people. And every room where I talk to hypnotherapists, there are a lot of people who put their hand up and say they're a number 5. Okay, so that's the visualization part, right? And in the beginning, when we talked about aphantasia, the whole emphasis was on visualization, and it was defined as a weak ability or inability to visualize in our mind's eye. However, as research went on, and that only, you know, that term was only coined in 2015. So although the phenomenon isn't new at all, and the first mentions of it were from the late 19th century, it kind of surprisingly really flew under the radar of psychology, neuroscience, and just wasn't picked up on as anything interesting. And it got picked up on by complete chance when a leading neuroscientist in the UK, Adam Zeman, got somebody referred a case to him of somebody who could visualize and then suffered a brain injury, had surgery, and then lost the ability to visualize. And that's how it all came into focus, you know, and there was an article written about this case in a scientific journal, and then a journalist picked up on that. And when he wrote an article about this particular case of somebody who could earlier visualize and then couldn't, suddenly people started coming forward saying, well, I'm the same, but I could never visualize. You know, I never had this ability. And from what we know, in the majority of cases, aphantasia is a congenital condition, meaning that people are born with it or have it for as long as they remember. And now for a very short moment, I'd just like you to close your eyes once again. Okay. And now just imagine that you're actually in an apple orchard. And just imagine it's a nice summer day, it's warm, and just feel those rays of sun on your face, maybe a light breeze, and have a look around. Just look at all those trees, apple trees, and just pick an apple that you would really, really like to get your teeth into. And I'd just like you to walk up to it, pick it from the tree, smell it, see how nice it smells. Just feel it, feel the skin, whether it's rough or not. And just now imagine that you're just taking a bite of that apple. Just imagine the taste. I'm sure it tastes really good. Okay. And take a deep breath in, just for the sake of it, and out. You can open your eyes. And if I can just ask you now, like, who was able to actually tune into those senses. Who was able to imagine all of this? That you're in the, okay, so Patty, Julia, okay, David as well, and Arlette as well. Okay, all of you, amazing. I'm kind of jealous. Okay, so a lot of you are hyperphantasic, so that kind of explains things to me a bit. And not you, Chrissa. Could you tune into any sense at all? Do you have any sense like, oh, I forgot to ask you to hear something, but
Oh, so well,
taste or
when you first said imagine an apple orchard, like I'm not good at visualizing. So cognitively, there was like different apple orchards moving around, and maybe I was in France, or maybe it was a cartoon, or I'm not even really sure. But then as soon as you said reach out and grab an apple, and I went like this, that kind of made it real to me. Still couldn't see, but the pretending that I was holding it and smelling it helped. So I was able to tune into those things. And then when I took the bite, I did salivate. So I must have also tuned into that one, just not the first one so much.
Okay, so that's interesting because I'd say both Chrissa and myself are aphantasic, but the biggest difference is Chrissa can tune into other senses, other internal senses, like the sense of smell, and I can't tune into any internal sense at all. So I don't have this internal sense of hearing, of smell, of touch, of I've forgotten the last sense of taste, right? And this, of course, impacts on how we process things, how we connect to things, and and it really, really matters in terms of hypnosis, basically, and how you work with people who have aphantasia. Because I discovered I had aphantasia by complete chance, right? In my mid 40s, I was in a psychotherapist office basically, and she was asking me to visualize, to go back to my childhood, visualize like my mom's face, all that kind of, those kinds of things. And I just couldn't. I would just go, she'd say, oh, can you remember the house you used to live in? And I would say, yeah. And she said, okay, well, can you just take yourself back to the house and what do you see? And I'd look at her like she was crazy and I'd say, nothing. And then she said, okay, well, what about imagine your mom's face? Can you see it? And I was like, no. And then she said to me, the typical apple test, imagine an apple, turn it around in your head. Can you do that? And at that point, I just burst out laughing like a crazy woman, basically. And I said to her, like, of course not. Like, who can do that? And she said to me, oh, about 99% of the population. And I was in complete shock because I was like, what? And at the time, because that was quite a few years back, right? That at the time, that was the estimate that around 1% of the population has aphantasia. Now we're saying it's closer to 4%. My own sense is, as research moves forward, as we gain awareness of it, more people are going to actually realize, and the numbers are actually seem to be higher. Just like looking at people I speak to and people who contact me and so on, it's just yeah. I personally I believe the numbers are higher. And so I realized that I had aphantasia, right, a few years back, but it never bothered me. I was just like, okay, so I can't visualize. Oh, well. I didn't at the time, I didn't quite realize the impacts it can have. All I knew was, I can't do meditation because every time I try a guided meditation, it drives me nuts because I can't see anything and I'm bored. And I have ADHD on top, right? So sitting there and trying to see something I don't see and not move is just the worst thing ever for me. But I don't think much of it at all. And then a few years later, by complete chance again, I got into hypnosis, into hypnotherapy, and I got so interested in, I learned a bit about it, got so interested that I started training in it. And that's when all this aphantasia stuff really hit me in the face because I was training in quite visual methods. So I trained with somebody whose methods were based on NLP. Then I trained with the Elmans. Then I trained with the Jacquins. And what was happening for me was basically I couldn't do any of the things that I was being asked to do. And I didn't even realize it had something to do with aphantasia. So obviously I realized I couldn't visualize and that was problematic. But I couldn't do other things either. I couldn't, if there were suggestions like your eyes are getting heavy, right? You can't open them. I'm one of these people who can always open their eyes, you know, arm stiffening, never stiffens, or the Ellman method, where you're kind of losing the numbers, right? You're counting backwards, and they say, well, by the time you reach this and this number, you're losing the numbers. You can't, you know, it's just the numbers are lost. I would never lose those numbers. So basically this whole training, and especially when people were training with me or practicing on me, it was so frustrating. I was getting more and more frustrated, and I was thinking, well, maybe this just isn't for me, because I can't do it. If I can't do it, how can I work as a hypnotherapist, you know? So and I gained this reputation of being a difficult subject, basically. So it was a bit of a challenge for my colleagues to, you know, other trainees to try to work with me, because it was never easy and a lot of the things failed. So but you know, maybe it was kind of fun for them, but really not for me. I was getting increasingly frustrated, right? And I kind of concluded, oh, it's just me. Maybe I'm just difficult. Maybe I'm just difficult, full stop. And I gave up on training. And then, but I remained interested in hypnosis and in hypnosis circles. And I was thinking, nah, I have to try again. So I started training with the Jacquins. And as I started training with them, from the very beginning, I contacted them and I said, you know, I can't visualize. Is this course still for me? And they said, well, maybe you won't be able to do some of this stuff, but it works for others. And yeah, we think you should give it a shot. But they, you know, Freddie and Anthony Jacquin basically gave me the space to speak up, to speak about my experience. And every time they ran a demonstration, they would say, oh, so Paulina, how was that for you? And I'd go, basically. And as I started speaking about it, other people started getting in touch. Other hypnotherapists are saying, I'm the same, I'm the same, I'm the same. And I thought, oh, okay, so it's not just me, so it's other people as well. So it's not me being difficult, it's just that we cannot do the things that we are being asked to do, and we just can't experience hypnosis in the same way that others do, using the same techniques. I mean, you know, going through the same processes. And you mentioned the research side, Chris. I didn't really introduce myself. I'm sorry, I forgot. But basically, so I'm a hypnotherapist. I'm a certified hypnotherapist, and I'm a researcher by background. I worked at universities. I'm a social scientist by background, and I did academic research for 18 years. So research is something that's very close to my heart, and you know, I have the skills to do it, basically. So when I realized it was not just me, I just thought, right, I can see a gap here. I can see a gap in our training. I can see a gap in knowledge, and I want to do something about it. And that's how this whole kind of research project came into being. And sorry, because I'm talking a lot at you. Let me just have a look if you have any, or if you have any questions, just raise your hand and stop me, because I can talk for England. You know, I kind of sometimes forget that I can talk a lot. But what I kind of really wanted to clarify is that this aphantasia, it is not just about visualization. And actually, it's not even just about tuning into other senses. So about 30% of aphantasics can access another sense, right? So they don't have the visual, but they have taste or smell or something, or another sense. And what I find is that with these people, even if you do visual kind of guided processes, if you tune into that sense that they can actually relate to, these guided processes still kind of work, right? But if you're asking somebody who doesn't have access to any of these internal senses to do it, then it's kind of, you can't really relate to it. And some people say to me, well, can you not just pretend? But it doesn't really work that way, because if you're pretending, it's a conscious effort. You know, it's a conscious effort to pretend something. Sorry, Chris, yeah.
Oh, just you have a couple of questions I wanted to point out. And since you're talking about other senses, this seemed like a maybe good time, because
yeah, sure.
questions have to do with that. So Dorothy said, do people typically have some overlap, such as mostly visual, but a bit of kinesthetic? I would say yes. What do you say?
Overlap, mostly visual, but a bit of kinesthetic.
Like as an example.
Sorry, I'm not quite sure, like, what people, do you mean people with aphantasia? Or do you mean
Well,
people, I'm lost, sorry. You need
okay.
to explain the question to me, yeah.
Okay, you're speaking about it as if it's very separate. So in my own case, I am a visual learner to an
Yeah,
extent, but if I
yeah.
listen to an audiobook, I learn it so much better. And one of the things I did, like the job I used to have, I had a huge number of passwords for different systems. And after I typed them once or twice, I knew them, but I could only type them. I couldn't tell you. So it was like my fingers knew this skill of doing the passwords.
Mm-hmm.
And the other, I know maybe it's not related or not, but I used to have a boyfriend who was a physicist. And so I met a lot of men who were physicists.
Mm-hmm.
And basically almost every single one of them was colorblind. So if a
Mm-hmm.
person's colorblind, would they still learn by visual, or would it be affected?
Interesting question. Like, would it have any, does it show up with aphantasia to any statistical significance, I guess?
Because it just seemed odd that so many of these men in physics were
Mm-hmm.
colorblind, and they all
Mm-hmm.
had different degrees. Like, and he told me a story once of a woman talking to the group, and she was doing a PowerPoint presentation, and she went out of the room, and then all the men started laughing because to them she looked like all her lipstick was black because none of them could see red, and they just were laughing because they thought she looked so ghoulish. And I'm sure if this woman had known how they were laughing about her because of her lipstick, she would have been horrified. But it was just for them. And anyway, I just wondered if there's any connection between what you're talking about, this
Mm-hmm.
kind of difference, how much overlap there might be with, say,
Mm-hmm.
colorblindness.
So,
And because there
mm-hmm.
has to be something going on that so many people, well, so many men in physics, not all, but most of them, many of them are colorblind. So there has to be something in the brain.
Or maybe
So
it's in the water where you live, Dorothy. Maybe it's not.
Yeah, I've never heard of colorblind physicists, to be honest. So that's something
Well,
to
I would have been.
maybe.
I had this boyfriend, so that's why.
Yeah.
And he was actually from Germany, and he was working in England. So I mean, these were not Canadian, not just Canadians, but it's just. But the thing was, obviously by being colorblind, there was something. Their brain was really good at math.
Yeah.
But then,
Mm-hmm.
like once I was out with
Yeah.
him, I took a picture, and he was in front of a rose bush. And he couldn't see the roses because to him, the roses were a different shade of green. He could see
Mm-hmm.
green, but he couldn't see red. And
Yeah. So I
anyway,
think
I
there
just
are,
wondered because,
yeah, there are two things there, right? So I would say one thing relates to how should I put it? Natural. I mean, I think you've got a point there, Dorothy, because basically what research has found, so I've not, color blindness is kind of something else than aphantasia. And I have to say that's not something that I know much about. But what research on people with aphantasia has shown is that there's a high ratio of people with aphantasia go into scientific professions. And I'm kind of one of them, right? Because I was a researcher for many years, a social scientist. Many of them go into kind of hard scientists. And so I think that, and it is linked to your cognitive style, because people with aphantasia, because we don't have the visual to relate to, you kind of can't bring up the visual. You need to really train your memory to bring things out in a different way, and it's often like going through files and on a computer. It's a more cognitive style, it's a highly analytical style, and that is something that I actually wanted to relate to hypnosis. Because one thing I noticed, working with my study group is and looking at myself as well, is that people with aphantasia are highly analytical, highly literal, and often quite skeptical. So when you're kind of working with them as a hypnotherapist, that's one of the things to pay attention to, you know, that if you, and especially, and also at the same time, there's a higher ratio of people who have another neurodivergence in the mix, so either ADHD or autism. And if you kind of look at autism, a lot of people with autism are very, very literal. And kind of circling back to what I said earlier, that some people with aphantasia can still kind of tune into guided processes, you know, into some kind of, let's call it a guided visualization. And some people are quite good at, you know, you might even say visualize a sea, but they'll translate it into the sense that is dominant for them. But other people are very literal. And if you say visualize, if you say see, it really throws them off immediately. So that's one thing that I wanted to kind of draw attention to, that if you're working with somebody with aphantasia, language is very important, and using non-visual language. But I'm kind of jumping a bit. So let me just circle back for a moment and just explain some of the other characteristics of aphantasic. So we said, you know, the visualization is one thing, inability to tap into one or more other internal senses is another thing. Then there is the analytical side, which I think is very important when you're thinking about working with people with aphantasia. And then another thing, and that's again, I think, Dorothy, also related to, in a way, to learning styles and memory. Because another thing that's very characteristic of people with aphantasia, around 50% of people with aphantasia have a very poor autobiographical memory. So it means they have a very poor memory for what happened to them in the past. And around 50% have what is called severely deficient autobiographical memory. And that's, again, an important consideration when working with such people, because, you know, a couple of you said that you trained with Melissa Pierce, right? What she does is basically, you know, she does a lot of regressing, right? Regressing back to a moment. And my kind of, what I found through my research is that many aphantasics actually find that impossible to do, because they don't have that moment. They can't kind of remember that particular moment. And even when you're trying to tap into memory, some people, and what I'm observing is the people who do have another sense, again, they kind of relate to memories through the other sense. So if they have a good sense of smell and they, I don't know, smell bread, it suddenly reminds them of their, I don't know, grandmother's baking or making the bread and so on. So it's a whole, everything is kind of tied to that cognitive style in a way, and how people process things. Yeah.
You just basically did what 10 years of therapy could not do for me. Thank you for the validation.
Right.
I was told that the reason that I had such poor memory was just due to childhood trauma. But I've always had poor memory, like always, my whole life. Like, and chronologies make no sense to me. Like something could be last week or last year or a decade ago, and it's kind of all the same for me. And I don't feel 54. I look in the mirror and get surprised every day because I'm like, when did that happen? So like, I get it. I told it. So that anyway, you just totally validated what I thought was a problem. And thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. There's a lot of things, you know, connected to aphantasia that are a bit surprising, but I think they're also fascinating because they tell us so much about the human mind, not just of aphantasics, but how people relate to certain things, or how they, you know, how is memory stored, all that kind of stuff. But anyway, so you might find that regression might not work with an aphantasic client because they won't have a specific memory to go back to. And another thing that I've observed is that, and that research is bringing up now as well, is that it's not just about the event, it's also about emotions. So people with aphantasia find it more difficult to kind of tap into emotions they're not feeling in a given moment in time. So things like, really feel into the, remember the last time you were confident, and really feel into this confidence and ramp it up and all that kind of stuff. It might be completely lost on an aphantasic client because they just cannot do that, cannot remember. And a kind of thing that is related to that is also that a lot of people with aphantasia find it difficult to imagine themselves in the future. So again, if you're doing some kind of future pacing, that again might throw the aphantasic client off because they can't quite feel into, it's like when people work with me and say, oh, feel, once, just imagine yourself once you've achieved this success and really feel into that and so on. It's just, for me, it's just completely lost. And it's not just me, because everything I'm saying is based on, the research as well. So that is quite a typical trait too. And I think something to consider again is where do other neurodivergencies come into this? Because another thing I'm observing is, and people with ADHD and autism also find it difficult to imagine themselves in the future, to plan things and so on. So again, you've got that element. But also it's a bit of a different cognitive style again, and that needs to be considered as well, that if you've got somebody with ADHD, maybe a long progressive relaxation isn't the best way to go, basically. Okay, so...
Can I ask a quick question, actually?
Yeah.
So in quantum journeys hypnosis, one of the things that we do because of this is I ask the client to say, and when you get there, just tell me whatever you're experiencing. Dial any and all of your senses wide open and tell me what you're experiencing. So in your situation, like if somebody were to say, Paulina, what are you experiencing while you've got your eyes closed and they're putting you into whatever their, hypnotic trance, if they, recommend, hey, we're going to go explore something. I don't know. Like, what would you be experiencing? What are you tapping into?
We're going to go explore something, like what?
Yeah, so I don't know. Like, I just wonder, like, what do you experience internally?
What do I experience internally? Yeah. What do I experience internally? So I can experience whatever I'm experiencing in a moment, right? But I think what I find with working with people with aphantasia is that if through conversation you bring people really back into a moment and kind of connect that to the body and ask what is happening in your body, what are you feeling in your body right now?
Okay.
That is usually the way you connect with an emotion. Whether it's kind of made up or really felt, but I find that a lot of the stuff I do is really feeling into the body or breath work, and it doesn't work for everybody, right? Because again, some people on the autistic spectrum find it hard to tune into the body, but that kind of thing works for me, and things that are more abstract, not. So let me just give you an example. Like, for example, I had a session among the many, many, many failed sessions, hypnosis sessions that I had for myself. One really stood out for me because it was very effective. And kudos to the lady who carried it out, because she held the space for me for literally 3 hours, literally. And it was a session for grief. Like, my mom died quite young, I was kind of feeling guilty that I didn't save her. I was in my mid-20s at the time. And I kind of carried around this grief with me for over 20 years, basically. And I don't remember what kind of induction she used anymore, but in terms of the main session, what she did was, because she was asking me in the beginning, she tried to bring me back to a particular moment, right? She said, can you remember a moment when you were speaking to your mom? I'm like, no. But she said, okay, can you just make it up? Can you imagine a moment where you're speaking to your mother, where you're younger and you're speaking to your mother? I'm like, okay, I can, if somebody asks me to make things up, I can make them up, right? And I don't need a visual for that. And it doesn't need to be real. I can just think of it, basically. And then what she did was put me in a conversation, basically, between the younger self and the mum and my older self and my younger self. And it was all this kind of gestalt setup, I guess. And it wasn't asking me to tune into a particular moment or particular emotion. But because I was imagining the situation, I was making it up. I was completely there, like completely there. And all the emotions did come up. So I think there's various ways of working, but what I find is if you're more abstract, if you give more space for the imagination, it's usually easier for the person with aphantasia to kind of just make stuff up and bring themselves there. If you're asking about a particular moment in time, like imagine this particular situation, or giving them a very specific thing to imagine, you're walking down this path and it's, I don't know, it's pebbles and this and that, it makes it much easier, much more difficult. So I would kind of say, if you put a more abstract spin on it and leave space for imagination, it's much easier. And for people to tune into that. And sorry, because I've just noticed David's question about how does this relate to anxiety, which is an interesting question because it doesn't seem to be related. I mean, people with aphantasia can experience anxiety the same way as other people. What research has shown is that maybe it's more difficult for us to imagine anxiety. Let me explain, because that sounds a bit, too abstract. But for example, there have been studies comparing reactions to things like scary stories. So a group of aphantasics, a group of visualizers, people were reading scary stories to them and observing their reactions. And what they found was that people who can visualize, they were doing the oh God, I forgot the word. Well, observing how the skin behaves. The skin I've forgotten the word, conduence. I forgot, sorry. But anyway, so they were, maybe. There's this one word that I've forgotten at the moment. But what they were observing was that people who could visualize were kind of reacting to the scary stories. You could see, they would start sweating. You could see the reactions on their skin. People with aphantasia were not reacting to that. So in terms of this kind of anxiety or being scared or feared, which is prompted by outside and artificial, let's add, because that was a lab-based experiment, right? By some kind of artificial outside influences, it seems that people with aphantasia don't react the same way, right? And they don't have the same, I don't know, if they're watching scary films or traumatic films, they don't have the same kind of flashbacks that people who can visualize have. And not just obviously that you can't have flashbacks, but that relates to less flashbacks in all other senses, auditory and so on, for the people who have them. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. So when we're talking about this anxiety that somehow that is prompted by external factors, people with aphantasia might not be affected to the same degree as visualizers. However, what I'm observing is that but it's not a protective factor against anxiety, because as we know, anxiety, a lot of it comes from a way of thinking. And it's actually, research has actually shown that about 35% of people with aphantasia do show kind of mental health issues or have anxiety, have something going on. So that kind of proves that visualization doesn't have to do anything. It doesn't have to have anything to do with it. So yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering when you were doing the exercise with the biting the apple off the tree, one of the things that I found that happened for me was when you said see yourself in an orchard, it helped me because I have a photo in my mind exact photo when I took my daughter to, when she was little, to an orchard. So that image came up. And same thing with imagining an apple. It was something that I have a lot of photographic images of that. But if you said to me, imagine a giraffe galloping through the savannah, I don't have anything to access because I don't have a store of that kind of thing. Or imagine, getting to the top of Kilimanjaro. I don't have enough information stored that I can get myself there visually. And I just wondered if, for instance, you had a photograph that you looked at of your mother, say, and then we took the photograph away, and I said to you, now, can you visualize that photograph? I think would be very different than saying, can you go back in your memory 20 years ago and picture yourself talking to your mother?
Yeah.
And so I don't know how that plays with aphantasia, but it also made me think of now in this day and age where, I mean, children from the time they're infants are seeing videos of themselves and seeing pictures of themselves on their parents' phones, and getting all of those sounds of that birthday party. I mean, they've seen it over and over again, and I'm wondering how this in the coming decades is affecting people's memories of things that happened to them and how they were at certain ages. And, I was the fifth out of 6 kids, so there weren't very many pictures taken of me when I was little. So I have a few of them, but not too many. And so I can kind of a wee bit access what I might have looked like back then because I can remember a particular photograph, but I can't go back and visualize myself at that age. So I don't know how all that plays in, but
I actually find that quite interesting, Patty, because I'm wondering, like the rest of you, if you were to imagine, I don't know, an orange dragon soaring through the sky, right? Can you do that?
No.
So you can't, Patty.
No. I mean, I can make a cartoon of something that, but if for instance, I mean, people that are really high on that scale of being able to visualize, my brother, I would say, well, draw me a picture of a cat that's stretching when it's just woken up from a nap, and he can just sit down and draw it because he has that visual and that creativity. And I have another brother who you can say, hey, remember the song of such and such, play it in your head, and he can actually play it in his mind's ear. I mean, he can hear it going on, and I think, what song are you even talking about? I have no idea. So, I just think all of this is a spectrum, of course, but at what point is it completely blank? I'm not completely blank of a tune. I mean, if you said, well, visualize the tune of Happy Birthday, I can kind of get there with a little practice, but I'm low down on that scale. But on other things and maybe if I were played music over and over, as in my stored memory, if that was part of my training or my family did it all the time, maybe that would have been more in tuned. But I'm not sure any of this comes to play with aphantasia if you really have you come from a zero, whether that can be increased. But
I mean, I find it interesting that you say that if you have a visual to refer to, if you've seen something, or if you remember a photo, that's what you bring up in your mind. Because I know it kind of sounds counterintuitive in a way, but many people with aphantasia have a visual memory. So it's like you can't see the thing, but you can remember seeing it. It's difficult to explain. It's almost like there's a blank computer screen and your files are there, or a dark curtain, but a moment ago you saw somebody there, but there's the curtain, so you can't see them anymore, but you have a memory of seeing them. That's actually Yeah, and that's actually quite typical of people with aphantasia to retrieve memories that way. And I think, yes, of course, if of course, with memories, a lot of course, reinforcement definitely plays a role in memory, right? So I agree, even if you have aphantasia, if somebody was telling you the same story every day, then of course you're going to remember the story. If you're seeing the same picture every day, you're going to see it. But I mean, not see it, but you're going to remember it. But yeah, but if you don't have that reinforcement all the time and you can't visualize, it's more likely that you will not remember the event or you will not remember, what happened. Which again, I think is important for hypnosis, because what I find, it's even in hypnosis, you can't necessarily access those memories that you don't even know, especially if you don't know. I mean, you just cannot necessarily access them. Okay, so maybe, sorry, because I've been jumping around a bit, but maybe just to summarize this all in a way that makes some kind of sense for hypnotherapy. So let me just set up the picture of, okay, so we know what people with aphantasia can't do. So how do we actually proceed in terms of working with people with aphantasia? And what I say is, like, the first thing, and that's why I took you through this very, very, very simple apple test in the beginning, and then very, very, very simple orchard test, because I think the first step really is, and I would say to do it with all your clients, is to test people's mental imagery. Because, many people might be like me and not even realize that the rest of the world can visualize, and not realize why they're failing at something, why they're failing at hypnosis, because they don't know that picture something that other people can picture it. They think it's just a figure of speech, right? And I think the thing is, with imagination, with mental imagery, is we're creating all this to take people somewhere, right? To take them on a journey or to create an emotion. So if you're trying to take people on a journey they can't make, it's completely counterproductive, basically, because all they're doing is thinking, conceptualizing, intellectualizing, and that's not where you want somebody to be when you're working with them with hypnosis. And I think because a lot of people who, and that's also why I think pre-talk is really, really important. I'm kind of saying to people, you don't need to visualize anything, you won't need to say anything, just set them up for success. Because if you don't mention that and people, think they have to, then again, it's kind of setting them up for failure. And what I find, especially with fellow hypnotherapists who have aphantasia, is that we have very specific expectations of what hypnosis is. And that might also be the case for clients. They might have seen something, they might have seen a film, they might have talked to somebody, and then they will expect the same will happen for them, or they will experience it in the same way. And if a process is used that they can't tune into, they're not going to experience it the same way. So I think kind of leaving it as open as possible is good. And then, as I mentioned, a lot of people with aphantasia are really, really analytical, like really analytical, often literal. So I always say confusion inductions, something to switch the brain off, works really well. Something that's more maybe kinesthetic, that kind of thing. And with language, even, with language, I'd be very careful in terms of the language you use. So not use words such as picture or see or visualize. Some people even object to the word imagine, because when they think of imagine, they think of a picture. So it's better to use phrases such as think of something, because we all think, conceptualize, maybe bring to mind, experience, imagine it any way you like, get a sense of something. So more language that is much more open, or as Anthony Jacquin says, I've forgotten actually, artfully vague, that's what he says, artfully vague. And then in terms of techniques, I would say any non-visual techniques are better to use than things with visuals. So things, kinesthetic techniques, breath work, conversational hypnosis. And I have no idea how you guys do your stuff, but I'm really interested to learn. If you are using guided imagery, if somebody can tune into one of their senses, or if they're still happy to give it a shot, that's fine. But I would say really, really slow down. Because basically what is happening for an aphantasic person is because we don't have this immediate ability to bring the picture to mind, you're kind of constructing the idea of a picture in your head. It just takes us more time. It just takes us more time to process things, and again, kind of the artfully vague language, right? And just to finish off, I'd like to say that it is usually a trial and error process, because there's a lot of individual variation between people with aphantasia. There's a lot of differences, you know, even between me and Chrissa, there's a huge difference. And what I found when I was starting out with the study, I was like, oh, I'm going to develop the ideal protocol for working with people with aphantasia. And then very early on, I realized that actually I'm not. Because there are so many individual
there's just no one
differences.
size fits all, you know.
There's just not, and
but
even
I
with
love your ideas, like the
Mhm.
get a sense of, or conceptualize, or bring to mind. I am absolutely going to use all of those. Also, you're going to be presenting at Hypnothoughts.
Yes.
We've got a couple minutes left. So tell us a little bit about that. What are you going to be presenting on? I know it has something to do with aphantasia, and
It is it. Yeah. So
is
yeah.
this sort
So
of a precursor?
Yes. So it's going to be a shorter talk, like short and snappy, 20 minutes, and yeah, just the basics, basically. What aphantasia is, what are the characteristics, and maybe I'll dive a bit more into that, and how best to work with.
And those suggestions on how to
Mhm.
verbally help somebody,
Yeah.
those are little bits of gold right there. So thank you so much for sharing that. What day and time are you presenting? I want to come
So
in.
I'm presenting on Friday the 19th at 9:30 a.m. So if anybody wants to join us at Hypnothoughts, come and join us. I'm so you know, pumped for coming to the States. I've never been. Can you imagine?
We might have to keep you. I might just kidnap you and, like, you know, bring you to the ocean instead for a little while.
Oh, right, cool. I love the ocean.
So I will see you there. Who else here is going to Hypnothoughts? Raise of hands, anybody? Josh, Patty, yay! All right, well, cool. I'll be presenting on, oh, Cece's raising her hand. I'll be presenting on Sunday at 3 p.m. So hopefully I'll see whoever can come at that time.
And I'll organize a meetup, like an aphantasia chat. It's just, I've never been to the Sahara Hotel. I have no idea when there's the best, you know, where's the best place, when's the best time.
I haven't been there yet
stalling
either.
on that.
I haven't been to that one.
But I'll organize a meetup. So keep your eyes peeled if you're interested, and just connect with me on social media or on the Hova app.
Rooming with some friends of mine, so I'm pretty sure we'll all end up like spending a little time together.
Cool.
At least, so. Thank you so much for this, Paulina. It's been really wonderful. And again, like just like you, it was such a surprise to me that not everybody was like me. Like I was like, wait, what? There are people that can actually see crisp and clear pictures in their head, like for real. I was so jealous. But then I remembered, and we didn't really get a chance to talk about this, but I remembered as a kid, I could. And then I lost the ability. And I actually know when, where, how, and why now, but at the time I didn't. So I don't think there's one size fits all for anything, including how a person develops aphantasia. Maybe they're born with it, probably most of the time, but I think sometimes it also is a result of something else. In my
yeah, absolutely. I forgot to mention it, but it can be a result of trauma or some other psychological
I had an imaginary friend who was an elf, and I got bullied and harassed. And so my subconscious probably came in and said, let's rewire the part of your brain that visualizes so that you don't keep getting harassed and bullied for having an imaginary friend. And bam, all these years later, I'm just now starting to kind of be able to turn it back on a little bit because I can visualize in my dreams. I don't have blank dreams.
Well, that's something that I didn't get around to mentioning, but most aphantasics actually do have visual dreams because it's different areas of the brain that are visualizing kind of on purpose when you're awake, and different ones that
that's what I started doing. I taught myself
REM sleep.
I taught myself how to lucid dream so that, well, for a number of reasons, but one of the things I wanted to do is like when I'm dreaming and I realize I'm dreaming, which is I can't do it every time I intend to, but sometimes I'll tell myself like, pay attention to how you got here, like the part of your brain that is being activated right now, like let's turn those parts on when it's time to visualize. And like sometimes it kind of works, but it's not consistent yet. And I'm not really missing out, right? Because I still have all these other senses. And that's something that maybe you'll talk about more at Hypnothoughts, is that there are some aphantasics that just have absolutely no internal senses at all. Yeah. That's a whole different thing. I want to talk to you about that, even if you don't mention it in your talk, because that's something that's very fascinating to me.
I'll mention as much as possible in 20 minutes.
In 20 minutes. We're just going to have to like, we'll do it in warp drive.
Yeah.
I feel like you need way more than 20 minutes. Put
in a request.
Thank you so much, Paulina. And I did put the YouTube link in the chat. So there's lots and lots of spotlight guest hosts that we've had over the years. Lots of great people for you to watch. And the one that we did today, also great, is going to be up by tomorrow. So that's where you'll find it if you missed any part of this. Or if you tuned out, or if your cat jumped on your lap at one point and made you get up and go let him out. So I missed a little bit too. Anyway, thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday, everyone. And I'll see some of you at Hypnothoughts.
Yay. Thanks for having me, Chris, and see you guys at Hypnothoughts.
It was great. Thank you so much, Paulina. It's such a fascinating topic. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks.